So thanks, Franz. So I just wanted to talk about some microservice mistakes that I survived just about. So who am I? I'm Matt Hunt. You can find me at Twitter and at does.net. I don't post a lot, but I do. It is the best way to contact me. I've been a developer for about 17 years plus. I used to do networking and support things until I got bored of turning computers on and off. And then I came over to be a developer. I was a contractor for about 10 years of those 17, and sort of ended up specializing through no choice of my own in distributed systems and some microservice stuff. I'm now a .NET developer advocate at Vonage. Funnily enough, our next speaker, Steve Lorello, I've got his old job. So this is quite weird, a weird meeting. I need to start off as well by saying I love microservices. I've given this talk to some friends, and they need to tell me. They said that I sounded like I don't like microservices. I love microservices. I really do like microservices. So despite what I say during this whole talk, remember that I do love microservices. I spent a lot of time trying to, or learning things. I bought all Sam Newman's books, but all the books I could find on microservices, and I spent a lot of time in roles to do with microservices. But invariably, I made so many mistakes. I've just realized how many I actually made. So perhaps it's good that I'm a developer advocate now and no longer contracting. So I wanted to do this talk. I wanted people to learn from my mistakes. I heard a lot of going to conferences when we were allowed out of the house. I used to hear a lot of people talk about how to do microservices, but no one said about the pain they went through. They were like, "Oh yeah, this is how we do it," and whilst it was true, I think they hid a lot of the pain because there is pain. So I've broken down some of my mistakes and the mistakes that I've gone into companies and seen during being a contractor, because it's not all me. So I've broken them down into 5 areas, and I've got some topics for each of those areas to discuss. So first of all, doing microservices is the first bit. Then we'll talk about team structure, testing, synchronous communications, and lockstep deployments. So without further ado, as I'm burning my time, doing microservices. So we start by everyone is doing microservices, so we should do them too. This isn't really something that I've been responsible for. I used to work for a large comparison website. I'll just leave it at that. And their CTO was always saying, "Yeah, we're going to do microservices." Like day one, I walked in, "We're going to do microservices, Matt. We're going to do microservices. You're going to help us." Brilliant. He just forgot to tell everyone as well. So they were like, "We want to do these microservices, but we don't particularly have a problem to solve." So the buzzwords, I'm sure everyone knows that microservices is just a massive buzzword. So don't do them until you've got a problem to solve. This is one thing this was a long road that I went down with this particular company. One thing they did get right was they started small. They started with one microservice and tried to see what the pain was with one microservice and see what hurts. After 3 months of trying to get a very simple CRUD microservice working, they had found out all of the pain. Another part of this is, which I just mentioned, is don't use it unless you've got a problem that specifically guides you down that path. There's the things that it can solve. We've just heard about from Franz as well. It's like better scalability, stronger resilience, higher availability, quicker release cycles, better organizational alignment. Those are the sorts of things that you can get to, but unless you've got a problem and the solution is microservices, don't do microservices. Cost, we've just talked about this. Cost is something that a lot of people don't seem to, they think we'll just have microservices and our cloud bill won't go up. I've seen people, and I've done it myself with personal projects, which was quite a shock. That the large cloud bill that you get, I'm sure everyone's had that large cloud bill when they thought, well, we'll just spin up all of these services and it'll be fine. Obviously, there's lots of tricks that we've just learned from Franz to solve that. But yeah, the cost the cost of doing microservices people don't realize. Another thing is the complexity can become overwhelming unless you're ready for it. One of the advantages that is touted of microservices is that your code complexity will go down, and that is true because when you have lots of truly small microservices, but your overall system complexity goes up, and you need to be very aware that this is going to happen. The last one on doing microservices is if you've got a Greenfield project, don't just say we're going to start with microservices. Try building a monolith. I worked for a bank recently that did microservices extremely well, and I'll probably mention them again in this talk. But they started with a monolith, and they'd gone through the learning of their sort of business domain with that, and then they specifically had sort of scaling issues and things that they needed to solve with microservices. And they started to sort of what I class as the right way, using a monolith and then going to microservices. I suppose you could start cloud native as well, which is, in my opinion, different to a monolith. The second area that I've seen a lot of people fall down on is the team structure. And I'm kind of, there's a few in here that is me, and I've made mistakes. So the first one is the inverse Conway Manoeuvre. This is kind of another buzzword, this one that I've seen, but this is true. You need to align, if you're not familiar with Conway's law, it states any organization that designs a system will produce a system that's a copy of the organizational structure. So this, I'm still learning the full implications of Conway's law. But what this kind of means to me is that you need to organize your teams in the fully sort of product teams that talk to each other in the way that your system would talk to each other. Mainly because microservices and implementing microservices as well is sort of a cultural shift, not just a technical one. You have to have all of the company thinking about how this all works and fits together. The next thing this is one that I've definitely tried to do is try to implement microservices with just a handful of developers. So with a team of 10 people, and I've gone into a contract that has had sort of a team of 10 people and sort of 20 microservices, which would work out to two people a service if you split them completely evenly. But again, it can't work. I think if you're a small company with sort of 10 developers, maybe even less, then you're not going to reap any benefit from putting microservices in there. Also, you need sort of that. Once you have got lots of teams, you need sort of some way of communicating best practice, let's say, between those teams. I've seen principal developers do that role very well, where you have got a lot of developers, and then it's the principals will come in and say, well, this team did this well, and that helps you work efficiently and learn from other people's mistakes. Another thing I've seen done successfully was having development teams or product teams that create the microservices, and then other developer teams that are supporting services. Such as one thing that worked really well was when I saw a supporting team that just wrote deployment pipelines. That was their entire job, was sort of the CI/CD pipelines. And then they would supply the product teams with sort of pre-built pipeline templates, and you pick and choose what you need. And within sort of, well, in sprint 0, in the first week or two, you'd be deploying to development. So you've got that sort of high cadence. So this, not having this sort of structure, in my opinion, can let you down. It's not fully needed, but I think something a lot around this area is good. Another thing that I've called enabled autonomy. You need the teams to be autonomous. You need to give them trust. This sort of comes with having teams that are made up of the different disciplines. So like a delivery manager, perhaps a product owner, back end, front end, QA, all of the different disciplines to make that one story or that one piece of functionality. But then you need to sort of let them go. Like the managers, to a degree, need to let them go, like you'd let your children go to university, and then they come back to you and say, look what I've done. Probably spent a load of your money at the same time. But they need to be able to architect things potentially within boundaries. But they need to be able to come up with their own architectures, and also they need to be able to make their own mistakes within that team. You can't handhold everyone. You need to let them go and be free, because you learn by your mistakes. The last bit around team structure is sort of the product team needs to sort of understand what the microservice architecture looks like and how it's put together. There's things like sort of inter-process communication, sending messages down queues, potentially different storage mechanisms. So they need to have some basic idea of how all of this gets put together, because they need to design some sort of product or system that fits into this. So my next sort of area is testing. This is a bugbear of mine because I've seen it done badly, and there are lots of companies so behind on testing, in my opinion. Manual testing, that's the one. Stop it. Just stop manual testing. You need, if you're going to go down the microservices route, you need automation. You lose so many of the benefits if you try and manually test all of these things. The benefits of sort of quick release cadence. And you won't be able to test everything. And then having sort of a dedicated tester inside the team, or an SDET inside the team, is sort of not having that would be a failure, in my opinion. Having sort of a siloed testing team that you throw things over the wall, it sort of has let people down, and it slows the cadence. I've seen this done where we've had a test team that you do your work, throw it over the wall, then they sort of do manual testing, they click through, they run some postman tests at your service, and it invariably bugs happen. Which brings me on to this. So having very little beyond unit tests is not going to work, and I've failed at this in a couple of jobs as well and learned my lessons. You need to have those integration tests. You need to be able to test. You need to test beyond classes as your units, actually have a larger unit. And the integration tests are so important. Sometimes they take a lot to get used to if you're not used to unit and integration tests. I know when I first started learning or doing more and more integration tests, it took a while to get into the rhythm of things. Then clicking around, I just mentioned this, click testing by clicking around a front end when you have many services behind it. This is gonna, it does produce errors, or you do miss bugs. So I'm very aware of my time ticking past. Synchronous communications. So what do I mean by this? So having microservices talk to each other over HTTP. So your user does something on your website or your API, and that calls a service, and then that service calls another service, and then that service potentially calls two services, and then you end up in sort of a fan-out situation where your services are just fanning out and talking to each other, and this is all in the sort of the scope of one request. Years ago, when I was building a microservice product, and we had an SLA given to all of the teams. So 200 milliseconds was your SLA for returning a single request. So with this and fan out, and then the latency of many HTTP requests going on, no one thought that 2 milliseconds would add up, and then it did, because everyone got it down to 200 milliseconds, but the whole request was sort of 2-3 seconds long. And we failed our SLAs and had to go back to the drawing board because of that oversight. And so also trying to rationalize synchronous synchronously distributed transactions. There's an error in the slide. You need, if you're doing lots of transactions through lots of microservices, all in one request scope, then if something fails, you have to then have some kind of mechanism to go back and undo all of those, all of the sort of the committed transactions. You need to sort of start thinking about using eventing, using your queues, or using topics on service bus to do asynchronous messages, such as sagas and things like that, so that you can, if one transaction fails, you can send a transaction failed message or a rollback message, and everything in that whole sort of sequence can roll back. Also, synchronous communications, if you have lots of services talking to lots of other services, that sort of rationalizing that in your head, it could be a nightmare. If you're sending an event, you just need to know that you've sent that event asynchronously, and anyone that cares about what you've done in your service can listen to it. If you have to have HTTP requests telling those of other services that you've done something, then you have to sort of coordinate between all of those microservices and let them know what happened. Tight coupling. This could happen as well with synchronous communications. The sort of way I've just mentioned, the rationalization would come into it. You're tightly coupling all of your processes to each other services. And also, if you don't manage versions correctly, then you could end up sort of tightly coupling one service to another. I'm just going to whip this one. Lockstep deployments. So lockstep deployments, for those that don't know, if you've got service A and it relies heavily or is tightly coupled to service B, then you have to deploy service B and service A both at the same time. This was one of my last contracts. I was in a place that did this. It slowed down development and cadence. You needed to then coordinate. You couldn't do any releases until all the other services that were sort of in this lockstep were ready to be released. You ended up then doing out of hours deployments because you had to upgrade all of these services all at the same time. And no one wants to be sat at a computer at 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening. They'd rather be watching Coronation Street or in the pub. And yeah, absolute nightmare. The last thing I wanted to talk about was shared libraries. So this was one great project that I worked on briefly. I think one of the people that worked there is on the call tonight. We had Service A would publish, when it was released, it would publish its own libraries, and then Service B would consume those libraries, and it would consume it during its sort of CI process. But then Service B would publish some libraries, and Service A would consume those libraries. And then that worked brilliantly. And then one day the NuGet feed disappeared. And we were like, oh, that's okay. We'll create a new NuGet feed and just run all the CI pipelines. But then Service A wouldn't build because Service B hadn't built and hadn't published its packages, and then vice versa. So that was just a crazy situation we were in, and that took weeks to sort out. And that's it. Just wanted to say, let's just keeping it very simple to start with is always where I'm at these days. I've gone away from, let's build microservice the world. Just now I'm just start simple and work up to it. Thanks for listening. Sorry I rushed a bit. I just saw my time ticking away and I had a lot to say. If you have any feedback for me, I'd really welcome feedback. I'm at does.net because I does.net. Yeah, and I'd like to pass you over to the guy who's I'm very glad left Vonage because he gave me a job, and that's Steve. Steve,
yes.
Hello.